Welcome to Cybercast, decoding today's cyber issues. I'm your host, Sarah Seibert, and welcome back to our Ransomware Miniseries, which features federal cyber leaders across civilian and defense agencies discussing ransomware trends and how they're working to address ransomware threats. Joining me today is Dr. Kevin Fu, Acting Director of Medical Device Cybersecurity at the Food and Drug Administration Center for Devices and Radiological Health. FDA has been accelerating its cybersecurity strategy to mitigate growing ransomware threats, with attackers increasingly focusing their efforts on health IT systems and hospital networks, which poses new risks to patient safety and care. As part of the agency's effort, FDA recently released an updated draft of the premarket cybersecurity guidance titled Cybersecurity in Medical Devices, Quality System Considerations and Content of Premarket Submissions. The guidance emphasizes a proactive approach to cybersecurity, focusing on security risk management, leveraging capabilities like threat modeling to drive a proactive approach to cybersecurity. To kick off this episode, I'll turn it over to Dr. Fu, who will dive into the potential impacts and challenges of ransomware on medical devices and hospital networks, like delayed patient care and compromised patient data. So today we're joined by Dr. Kevin Fu with FDA. We're going to dive into some of the challenges with ransomware on medical devices and hospital networks and how FDA is combating some of those threats. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be back.
Yeah. So to kick off this episode, could you explain the potential impacts and challenges of ransomware on medical devices and hospital networks, like delayed patient care and compromised patient data?
Sure. I think I can speak to that question. And maybe I should just begin with cybersecurity has really evolved over the last 10 years for medical devices and healthcare from science fiction and sort of hackers and hoodies in their basement to actual threats and even nation state level threats. So it's no longer theoretical. This is a real issue that affects patient safety and the highly available, safe and effective delivery of healthcare. So one of the sort of most observable impacts of ransomware is the unavailability to deliver healthcare. So you see this all the time. You don't have to look too far in the news. Every day or every week, you'll hear of another health system disrupted by ransomware getting into their traditionally their IT systems that affect medical records and such. Now, what's changing and what's sort of new here is that this type of malware is no longer just affecting pure information. It's also beginning to affect medical devices themselves. So, for example, last year, in April of last year, there was a radiation oncology product that, because of some downstream effects of ransomware remediation, the manufacturer's cloud became unavailable, and the radiation therapy devices depended upon this cloud in order to deliver its therapies. And so these devices were unavailable to deliver patient care for weeks because of this ransomware. So it's no longer theoretical, and rescheduling radiation therapy is not as simple as rescheduling a haircut. There are extremely important timing sensitivity for regular dosage. These are highly utilized devices. It's very difficult. It's not just an annoyance. This is putting patients at risk when these devices are not available as intended. So delayed patient care is a big problem when it comes to ransomware. Now, ransomware, in my opinion, is more of a symptom than a problem. It really speaks to subtle security flaws deeply baked into a lot of the healthcare system. In my opinion, these devices should be able to resist ransomware, but it's clear when ransomware disrupts healthcare or a medical device, something went awry in the early medical device design with the threat modeling for the medical device.
Yeah, that's definitely a scary thought as ransomware only continues to grow and it's affecting patient care delivery. So, you mentioned some of the subtle flaws in the medical devices themselves. How is FDA creating new guidance to better protect against ransomware threats? And what are some of the key takeaways from this guidance and how it could better secure networks and devices?
Right. Well, let me first just say that ransomware is a real issue. It is a symptom of, again, sort of design flaws in medical devices. And we have created new guidance that we believe will cut to some of the root causes of what makes ransomware so effective, what makes ransomware harm the safety and effectiveness of a medical device. And we published some draft guidance just about a month ago on quality system regulations, speaking to pre-market recommendations and expectations from FDA to manufacturers on what documentation they should provide regarding their cybersecurity engineering and designs that go into the medical device. And one really important piece of this guidance on the pre-market cybersecurity being built in rather than bolted on is something called threat modeling. And I'm a big believer that you need to treat the root causes rather than the symptoms. And ransomware, it's a real symptom. It's causing real problems, but it's not the problem itself. And so if you start to trace back what causes ransomware to be such a big issue, it can be traced back to things like lack of threat models. So a threat model is the cybersecurity equivalent to hazard analysis. You're identifying the different kinds of risks, you're categorizing whether they're acceptable risks or unacceptable risks or conditionally acceptable, and you're designing deliberate security controls rather than just purchasing things or whatnot. You're actually very carefully aligning the approaches to the potential threats. And I would say a goal of this guidance is not necessarily to protect against yesterday's ransomware, which is a problem right now, but it's about protecting against ransomware 3.0. We know that this kind of malware is going to be evolving very quickly over time. And for guidance to be effective, it needs to stand the test of time, have a fairly long half-life. So threat modeling is so fundamental, and that's why you'll see a large discussion on things like threat modeling inside that guidance document. It doesn't necessarily ensure you're going to be protected against ransomware, but I can guarantee you the absence of a threat model means you're almost surely going to be susceptible to ransomware.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And I've seen FDA really promote the threat modeling with the playbook that you all have been working on in partnership with MITRE. And I know that will really help bolster security. So you mentioned the guidance and threat modeling itself. What advice would you give to medical device developers when it comes to securing systems?
Well, I think the operative word in your question is systems. And to that effect, I think you'll see in the draft guidance, FDA has actually changed the title of our pre-market guidance document. So it used to be all about pre-market cybersecurity controls and such. You'll see we've actually aligned it now with the Secure Product Development Framework and ties to the quality system regulations. So we think this will give much more cognitive, resonance with ensuring that the cybersecurity approach aligns with the quality system regulation approach. And it would be hard to, overemphasize the importance of the word system, because it's only natural, I think, for a human to think about components. It's really easy to buy a component or a security component. Unfortunately, security is a system property. It's not a property of a single component. So even if you buy a magic widget or you have some special security software, unless it's addressing the entire system, it's not a holistic approach. So for instance, only focusing on the network, that might create a nice network security story, but it's not necessarily addressing the full end-to-end system. So it's important to have secure components. Usually those are the kind of controls one would use when trying to combat the foreseeable cybersecurity risks. But you really need to take this end-to-end system approach. And that's why in threat modeling, I usually advise manufacturers to avoid things like assuming a secure hospital network, because let me just tell you, secure hospital networks don't exist. It's a figment of imagination. It's a hope. It's a fantasy. So instead, what we try to do is make those networks as secure as possible, but don't count on it. In fact, instead, the better threat models will assume that the adversary can control the network, has complete control of the network, and you can still build cyber secure systems to be able to resist that. But by having a threat model that doesn't count on the network providing security, it's going to lead to a much stronger system level security. And that's going to help defend against ransomware 3.0 while we're still struggling with ransomware 1.0.
Right. Yeah, that's great to hear. And you've mentioned ransomware 3.0 a few times, so taking that proactive approach to cybersecurity. So how is FDA developing risk management and contingency planning to proactively combat cyber threats?
Yeah, well, I think there's sort of many pieces of a nuance to this question. The draft guidance, I think, is spot on in the quality systems and really getting toward risk management. I know, again, sort of human nature often likes to think about computer security in sort of binary black and white kind of thinking. Hey, am I secure or am I not secure? But it turns out there's really no such thing as purely secure or purely insecure. It's really much more shades of gray. And so that's where risk management comes in. One of the things you'll see in the draft guidance document is an emphasis on software bill of materials, or SBOM. And that is really key to risk management and contingency planning for being proactive, because today, the way post-market vulnerabilities often, but not always, play out is there'll be some third-party software product, maybe a very popular product that's in many different systems, and somebody discovers a security vulnerability. It might affect IT systems, but then it might also affect medical devices. And so without an ingredient list of the third-party software, that is, without an SBOM, it's really difficult to quickly ascertain whether a medical device is vulnerable. So this is really going to help with the use case of a healthcare system having many medical devices. And when they have access to SBOMs from their medical devices, they can be much more deliberate about knowing what devices do they need to attend to, what's a high priority, and what ones don't use that particular vulnerable software product, so that they don't have to waste their mental energy running around with their hair on fire for something that isn't vulnerable in the first place. Our hope is it's going to allow them to focus on the real problems at hand without, again, having to just guess for every medical device what is vulnerable.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that what I've personally seen throughout government is this whole of government approach to cybersecurity, especially after some of the large scale attacks we've seen in the past few years and following President Biden's executive order on cybersecurity. So what role does cross-agency collaboration or public-private partnerships play in securing systems? And how is FDA collaborating with other federal agencies to bolster its cybersecurity strategy?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question, especially the operative word is collaboration. Cybersecurity, it's not only a system property, but it's also a shared responsibility. And I recognize most people do not like to hear about the existence of a shared responsibility, because that means you have to coordinate and get along with other parties. But I'm pleased to say that I see a large degree of very healthy collaboration, not only within government, but with public-private partnerships. So within the federal enterprise in the United States, FDA works very often with CISA, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. CISA tends to sort of behave almost like the EMT of computer security vulnerabilities and incidents, but independent of the particular risk management sector, where FDA, of course, has the remit for medical device safety and effectiveness. But we coordinate very often with CISA, who brings great technical expertise on the computer technology side, and then FDA brings in that particular expertise by statute for the understanding the risks of particular kinds of medical device technologies. There is so much nuance. For instance, to get a little technical, a buffer overflow is a very common vulnerability in computer systems. And so it might have a very high risk score from an IT perspective. But if you look through the lens of OT, or operational technology, a very high risk score for buffer overflow could be either very low or very high for a medical device, depending upon context, depending upon the particular clinical risks to safety and effectiveness. So that's where FDA really pairs well with other groups in the federal government. And there are many others, such as ASPR, HC3. There are many other groups within the federal enterprise that really work together, for instance, for communicating these risks to the public, for communicating to the public health sector. And then on the public-private partnership sides, FDA really appreciates being able to work with different groups such as the Health Sector Coordinating Council and the various information sharing and analysis centers, the ISACs. So for instance, the HISAC is one of them, as well as Medi-Sal. We often work with the Health Sector Coordinating Council, which puts together what I would consider sort of consensus documents on behalf of healthcare delivery and medical device manufacturers on very key topics. So it tends to be more strategic, such as strategic documents on how to cope with legacy medical devices. That is something HSCC has been working on. On the HISAC and the Medi-Sal side, we often rely on the HISAC and the Medi-Sal and other information sharing and analysis centers to manage post-market security vulnerabilities. So depending upon the severity of a vulnerability, it may be as simple as FDA posting a notice or CISA posting a notice, but sometimes there is so much nuance to a computer security vulnerability, we really need the help of the private sector. And so we rely on our partners in the private sector to strategically and with appropriate confidentiality get the word out to manufacturers and key stakeholders to patch systems as we are working through basically what's an arms race to try to patch the systems before a vulnerability becomes an actively exploited problem by would-be adversaries or nowadays even nation states that are very economically motivated, such as the ransomware you mentioned. There are a number of other groups we work with, MDIC, MITRE. On an international scale, we work with the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, or the IMDRF, more strategically as opposed to tactically. For instance, we're working with IMDRF on software bill of materials to get more consistency to regulations across the globe. Also working on things like, again, legacy medical devices, how to cope with the problem when a medical device is effectively so old that it's not only insecure, but it's insecurable. Maybe there's even no mechanism to provide a software patch for known vulnerabilities, how to cope with that. And so the IMDRF, as well as the Health Sector Coordinating Council, is very active in trying to bring consensus to how to coordinate on this, again, shared responsibility that is not ideal that it's shared because it means it's more difficult to manage. But the good news is it's a very collaborative environment, not only within government in the United States and across the globe, but also with the public-private sectors.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And you mentioned communication. I know that that's key when I've been listening into some of the other cyber experts across government. I think that that is a common weakness, is not everyone's on the same page. So having that shared responsibility that you mentioned, I'm sure will be essential to cybersecurity moving forward. So, since accelerating your cyber strategies and guidance, what are some of the successes you've seen, and how do you look to build on this momentum?
Right. Well, I think there's a famous senator that said sort of inputs are easy to measure, but are less meaningful. Outcomes are hard to measure, but are the ideal things. I think it'll be really difficult to, in the short term, talk about outcomes. But if you look over the last 10 years, FDA has come a really long way and has done a sort of full 180 on its stance on medical device security. So 10 years ago, I would say the community didn't really think, except for a few people, didn't really think computer security was a big deal for medical devices. I was one of the few people who was urging Congress and other key stakeholders that this is an important area to ensure safety and effectiveness for patients. Today, though, you'll see FDA working hand in hand with medical device manufacturers and health delivery organizations and patients and physicians, clinicians, security researchers. And I think the operative word is being collaborative. It has moved from a very adversarial climate, I would say, of 10 years ago, to one where we reach out to each other and we realize that we're all on the same page for, at least we want things to be safe and effective. And so, the question is how to be safe and effective, where there will be, different approaches. But it's really great to know that by and large, most of the stakeholders now understand this is a real problem. There are real adversaries out there who are economically motivated to cause harm. And the real goal is to ensure the safety and effectiveness. So I think this is a real success and really hard and is a testament, of course, well before I joined the FDA, but it's a testament to sort of the long-term vision of the leaders in FDA, as well as their partners in other parts of government and in the private sector to just work for over a decade on this problem and not give up.
Yeah, it's definitely been impressive to watch the work you all have done. So moving forward, where does FDA headed with its cyber strategy? Are there any projects in the pipeline that we should keep an eye on?
Well, of course, I can't talk about unreleased draft guidance. I think the biggest part, though, is taking a look at that draft guidance on the quality systems regulation. This is, again, about the pre-market security, getting it built in rather than bolted on. That is where I hope people spend a lot of their eyeball time. The public comment period ends in early July, and we're strongly encouraging people to give us feedback. We want feedback from stakeholders to help improve this document, which is all about recommending what kind of documentation manufacturers should provide to the FDA review teams to ascertain the security and therefore the safety and effectiveness of medical devices in the midst of these computer security risks.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, it's been great to have you as a two-time guest. Hopefully we'll get a third sometime in the future.
All right. Sounds great.
Ransomware is one of the most severe threats facing federal agencies, their partners, and vendors. Subscribe to and follow Cybercast to learn more about ransomware and for updates on the Cybercast Ransomware Miniseries. On our next episode of the miniseries, we'll be joined by FBI Cyber Criminal Section Chief Brian Smith, who will dive into the evolution of ransomware, transforming from individual entity attacks to enterprise threats. He'll focus on the FBI's investigation of ransomware and how the agency is moving toward a model of mitigation, prevention, and disruption. Thank you for tuning in.
Cybercast, along with GovCast and HealthCast, is a production of GovCIO Media and Research. For more podcasts and to check out the other shows, head to govciomedia.com. Watch out for new episodes released every Tuesday and Wednesday across our shows. You can follow all of them in your favorite podcast platform. And if you like what you heard, make sure to let us know by leaving a review. And if you have any topics you think we should look into, contact us at newsletter@gcio.com.